One man hid hacksaw blades inside his prosthetic leg and broke out of jail. Another ran a murder operation from inside solitary confinement. And a teenager with nothing built an organization that would control every prison yard in California for the next 60 years. These are the 10 most powerful leaders of the Mexican Mafia. And once you hear what they did, you won't forget any of them. And before we begin, if you want us to keep researching stories like this, please consider subscribing. We're trying to reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and every early subscriber truly means a lot. It gives us the motivation to keep making deeper, better, true crime videos for you. Now, let's begin. Number 10. Arturo Guzman, Artie. In the summer of 1977, a man walked into Signal Hill, California, pulled out a gun, and killed someone on behalf of the Mexican Mafia. That man was Arturo Guzman, and what made him different from most La Eme members is where he came from. At 17 years old, he was already a helicopter gunner in Vietnam, sitting behind a machine gun, watching bodies blown apart in a jungle war he had no personal stake in. The United States government trained him to kill without hesitation. When he came home, that skill didn't go anywhere. He wasn't a product of East LA juvenile halls or gang life from age 12. He was a soldier first. And whatever Vietnam did to him, it left something that translated directly into La Eme's way of operating. Total loyalty and zero hesitation when it's time to act. The 1977 killing in Signal Hill was a contract hit. La Eme gave the order, Artie carried it out. Anyone who didn't pay up the chain or talk to the wrong people got a green light, and Artie was on the execution end of that system. In 1978, a former member named Mundo Mendoza flipped and gave law enforcement everything they needed. Artie Guzman went down. So did Joe Morgan, the Godfather of La Eme. Two of the most powerful men in the organization, convicted in the same window, brought down by one informant. Guzman spent the next several decades in California's state prison system, eventually becoming shot caller for the Mexican Mafia at Corcoran State Prison, the same facility that housed Charles Manson. He sat at the table alongside the shot caller for the Aryan Brotherhood and the representative for black inmates. 3 men, 3 gangs, running the entire yard between them. Then came the chapter nobody saw coming. At Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, Artie joined a prisoner-run rehabilitation group called Redemption Row. One of the men he mentored was Sherm, the man who shot Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. Artie talked to him about Vietnam, about pulling a trigger on people you don't hate, about what that weight does to you over time. After 15 failed parole attempts across 53 years, Sherm finally received a parole recommendation in August 2021. Artie Guzman was part of that, a contract killer who understood trauma better than he was ever supposed to. That's Arturo Guzman. Number 9. Raymond Shryock, Huero Shy. On September 3, 1997, in a federal courtroom in Los Angeles, a 45-year-old white man named Raymond Shryock was sentenced to life in prison without parole as a top leader of the Mexican Mafia, a gang that, by its own rules, only accepts Mexican Americans. Raymond grew up in Artesia, California, running with a street gang called Barrio Artesia 13. He was not Latino. His nickname, Huero, is Chicano slang for a light-skinned or white person. The guys he ran with basically just started calling him the white dude, and that name followed him for the next 20 years, straight to the top of one of the most powerful prison gangs in the country. By the time the FBI started watching him in 1993, Shryock had already been a Mexican Mafia member for 2 decades. He was a shot caller, meaning when he spoke at a meeting, people either agreed or quietly ended up on a list. The FBI planted an informant who wore a wire and a hidden camera into hotel meetings across Southern California. Those recordings showed Shryock and other leaders sitting around tables, voting on who should live and who should die, dividing drug territory across Los Angeles, and collecting taxes from street gangs that answered to them. One decision came in early 1995. Shryock found out that a Mexican Mafia dropout named Anthony Moreno was living near his wife and kids in El Monte. Moreno already had a death sentence from the organization. Shryock recruited a new member, named Luis Pelon Maciel to handle it. The crew went to a house on Maxon Street. They killed Moreno, and also a woman, her 5-year-old daughter, and her 6-month-old son. Even the Mexican Mafia thought that was too far. They had the shooter killed on the exercise yard at San Quentin prison. The 1997 RICO trial lasted 8 months. It was the first time federal prosecutors used racketeering laws against a violent street gang, a legal approach that had been reserved for organized crime families until then. The case is officially titled United States versus Shryock. He was convicted of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and drug trafficking. He has been at ADX Florence in Colorado ever since, the same federal supermax that holds terrorists, bombers, and drug cartel bosses. He's still there today. The federal system has no parole. There's no date on a calendar that he's waiting for. Number 8. Rene Enriquez, boxer. On July 7, 1962, a baby boy was born in Artesia, California, to a Mexican immigrant family who had done everything right. Steady job, middle-class neighborhood, house in Cerritos. His father wanted him to take over the family business. Instead, Rene Enriquez became one of the most feared men in the California prison system. His older brother Mark gave him the nickname Boxer and used him to break into neighbors' homes. By 12, Rene was officially jumped into the local street gang Artesia 13, which means a group of older guys beat him up behind a gas station to welcome him. By 13, he was drinking and smoking weed. By 14, he was selling PCP on the street. His school records showed he had real potential. He dropped out in 9th grade. At 19, Rene went to prison for armed robbery. That's where he met the Mexican Mafia, La Eme, and everything changed. He stabbed a rival inmate to prove himself. Then he killed a biker, nicknamed Chainsaw, inside another facility. In 1985, at age 23, he was officially made a carnal, a full member. He later said, "As a mafioso, you have to be an elitist, arrogant. That's how you project yourself." By 1989, Rene was back on the streets on parole. Within weeks, he ordered the murder of a woman named Cynthia Gavalden because she was skimming drug money. Then he personally gave a fellow member named David Gallegos a fatal overdose of heroin, drove him out to a remote area, and shot him 5 times in the head, just to be sure. He was arrested shortly after. In 1993, he landed at Pelican Bay State Prison, locked in a windowless cell for 23 hours a day. Most people break in there. Rene ran a criminal empire from that cell for 10 years. He taught himself sign language to communicate silently across cell blocks. He helped push a citywide gang ceasefire in Los Angeles, not for peace, but to put tax collectors inside every major street gang in Southern California. In 2003, he flipped. He said the organization started killing children. He has been cooperating with federal law enforcement ever since, helping prosecute his former brothers. 5 different California governors tried to block his parole. He finally got approved in 2022. He's still on the Mexican Mafia's hit list today. Nobody said going straight was going to be easy. Number 7. Robert Salas Robot. September 16, 1968. San Quentin Prison, California. A man named Hector Padilla had one thing he actually cared about: a pair of shoes he polished every single day. While he was out of his cell, another inmate stole them. The thief figured he'd earned some points with the Mexican Mafia, so he passed the shoes up to a higher-ranking member. That member was Robert Salas. Salas took the shoes, walked back to his cell, the same cell Padilla shared, and the fight started right there. What came out of that fight wasn't just a broken nose. It was a war between the Mexican Mafia and Nuestra Familia that lasted decades and left hundreds of people dead. Robert Salas grew up in Boyle Heights, East Los Angeles, in a neighborhood called Hazard. He had polio as a kid, which left his joints stiff. He walked with a rigid, mechanical stride, so people started calling him Robot. The nickname stuck. He became one of the most feared men in the California prison system, the guy with the limp who ordered killings from behind bars without blinking. He was also, by all accounts, impeccably dressed. Always clean clothes, always put together. People who knew him said he was never without beautiful women around him, a man with a polio walk and the social life of a movie star. Between 1975 and 1977, law enforcement linked Salas to over 50 murders. He didn't pull every trigger himself. He didn't need to. One guy owed the Mexican Mafia $30,000 in unpaid taxes. Salas gave the order. Shot dead in Fontana. Another member announced he was leaving the gang. 3 men showed up at his house in Fresno. Here's the part nobody talks about enough. While Salas was running hits, the Mexican Mafia was quietly taking over government-funded drug rehabilitation programs. Non-profits with names like Lucha and Project Get Going, meant to help addicts. They used taxpayer money to buy drugs and fund murders. When one director's wife threatened to expose it to the state senate, she was killed in Sacramento. By the end of his life, something had shifted in Salas. He'd spent decades watching men he ordered killed. Men who trusted him. Men who feared him. At some point, nobody can tell you exactly when, he started attending Victory Outreach, a Christian ministry. He became a believer. Not quietly, not privately. He committed to it. He died on December 4th, 2004, at home, with his wife Rita beside him. The man who started a prison war over a pair of shoes died in peace. Number 6. Raul Leon, Huero Sherm. On June 10, 2002, a man named Jabila Barragan was murdered on the streets of San Diego. The person who ordered it was sitting in a 6 by 10-foot cell at Pelican Bay State Prison, 550 miles away, with 1 hour of outdoor time per day. Raul Leon had been locked in solitary confinement when he arranged that killing, not in general population where you can pass notes and whisper in the yard. Solitary. The kind of isolation designed specifically to cut someone off from the outside world. It didn't work. Leon grew up in Shelltown, a neighborhood in southeast San Diego. He came up through the local Sereno Street gang, got arrested, went to prison, and eventually became a full carnale, a made member of the Mexican Mafia. That made him the shot caller for San Diego. Every gang in the area that wanted to operate paid him. He collected from inside a cell. When prison investigators finally sat down with him at Pelican Bay and started asking questions about gang business, Leon didn't get nervous. He answered calmly. At some point, they asked about attacks on correctional officers. He told them on camera that corrections officers could get stabbed too. Then he kept talking. No raised voice, no change in expression. He mentioned it the way you'd mention a store policy. That moment ended up online. People who study prison gangs still reference it, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Like a man who genuinely had nothing left to lose and had made peace with that a long time ago. By 2006, a federal RICO indictment named Leon as the lead defendant alongside 21 others. He pleaded guilty in October 2007. On January 16, 2009, Judge Dana Sabra sentenced him to life without parole. 2 life sentences on top of that, in case anyone was unclear. Raul Leon had already spent years in solitary by the time that sentence came down. A man who could run a murder from inside an isolation cell probably wasn't losing sleep over paperwork. He is still in federal prison. He will die there. Number 5. Benjamin Peters, Topo. On July 16, 1991, inside the Los Angeles County Jail, a man got stabbed 26 times and lived. His name was Salvador Buenrostro. The 2 men who did it were Benjamin Topo Peters and Rene boxer Enriquez. They weren't trying to kill a stranger. They were punishing one of their own because he said something bad about the boss. That's the world Topo lived in. Benjamin Peters grew up in East Los Angeles, in a neighborhood called Arizona Maravilla. He joined the Mexican Mafia, La Eme, early enough that law enforcement would later call him a founding member. He didn't rise fast. He rose slowly, quietly, the way a man rises when he plans to stay at the top for a long time. By the early 1990s, Topo was running crews, giving orders, and collecting money, all from behind bars. The Mexican Mafia didn't need the outside world to operate. They had the prison system, they had the streets, and they had men like Topo who understood both. In November 1993, the previous Godfather, Joe Pegleg Morgan, died of liver cancer at Corcoran State Prison. Topo, then 54 years old, stepped into that role. He didn't hold it for long without a fight. A younger member named Ruben Tupi Hernandez from Ontario wanted the same seat. The two men competed for control of an organization with over 1,000 active members and tens of thousands of street soldiers across Southern California. That's not a gang dispute, that's a small war. In 1995, federal prosecutors used RICO, a law designed to take down organized crime families, against La Eme. 22 members were indicted. Topo was at the top of the list. 2 years later, in September 1997, a federal judge sentenced 56-year-old Benjamin Peters to life in prison with no possibility of parole. No parole exists in the federal system anyway, so that last part was mostly for emphasis. He died in February 2001 at age 60 from cancer. Before he died, he told prison staff he was afraid his own people would kill him because he was sick and couldn't pull his weight anymore. The man who once ordered stabbings from a jail cell spent his last days asking guards to protect him from the organization he helped build. That's not irony. That's just how La Eme works. Number 4. Rodolfo Cadena, Cheyenne. On December 17, 1972, in a prison hallway in Chino, California, a man walked out of his cell, knowing he was going to die. He had gotten the death threats the night before. He knew exactly what was waiting for him. He could have asked for protective custody, and they would have moved him somewhere safe. He didn't ask. He just walked out. That man was Rodolfo Cadena. He was 29 years old. Cadena grew up in Bakersfield, California, and got locked up for the first time at 16 after stabbing a man to death outside a dance hall called Salon Juarez. He went into Duell Vocational Institution as a teenager with nothing. No reputation, no connections, no size. The story that built his name happened at San Quentin. A 6'5", 300-pound inmate walked up to him on the yard, kissed him on the face, and announced that this skinny kid now belonged to him. Cadena left. He came back a few minutes later with a shiv, walked straight up to the guy, and stabbed him to death in front of over 1,000 prisoners. Not one person stepped forward as a witness. That was the last time anyone confused Cadena for easy. From there, he ran the Mexican Mafia's operations alongside Joe Pegleg Morgan, a white guy, by the way, with no Mexican blood, who somehow became one of the highest-ranking bosses in a gang called the Mexican Mafia. He and Cadena eventually got paroled members to infiltrate government anti-drug programs and funnel the funding back into the gang. The United States government was paying for its own drug problem. Toward the end, Cadena tried to broker peace with the rival Nuestra Familia. His own leadership responded by murdering 2 NF leaders right before the meeting. That told the Familia everything they needed to know about where Cadena stood, which was nowhere. He knew the morning of December 17th what was coming. The Nuestra Familia stabbed him around 50 times in that hallway, threw him off the 3rd floor, and kept going on the ground. He was buried in Bakersfield. His headstone says, "Remembered by your mother and family." His parents divorced shortly after. La Eme still has a kill-on-sight order for Nuestra Familia, more than 50 years later. Cadena spent his entire adult life behind bars, died at 29, and the organization still runs on rules he helped write. Some legacies outlast the people who built them. His just happened to be built on bodies. Number 3. Luis Flores, Huero Buff. In 1957, at the Duell Vocational Institution in Tracy, California, a teenager named Luis Flores sat in a prison cell and had an idea. The idea was simple. What if all the Hispanic gang members who hated each other on the streets agreed to stop fighting once they got to prison? What if, instead of stabbing each other, they worked together? That one thought became the Mexican Mafia, one of the most powerful prison gangs in American history. Flores went by Huero Buff. He came from Hawaiian Gardens, a small city southeast of Los Angeles, where he ran with the Barrio Hawaiian Gardens crew. Nobody outside that neighborhood had heard of him. By the time he left Duel, everyone in the California prison system knew his name. What made Flores unusual wasn't that he was the toughest guy in the yard. It was that he could talk enemies into becoming brothers. Guys from White Fence, Clanton, Avenues, Maravilla, gangs that had been at war for 20 years. Flores convinced them to shake hands and call each other carnal. That word means brother. And in La Eme, it meant something permanent. He and his co-founder Rudy Cheyenne Cadena later created the Blood Oath. Once you're in, the only way out is death. Before that rule, members could just walk away when they got released. After it, leaving meant someone would come find you. Flores built the walls himself and then locked the door from the inside. Here's where it gets interesting. Flores managed to stay out of prison for almost a decade after founding the organization. No parole, no probation. Cops couldn't touch him. He was treated like a legend in Hawaiian Gardens. Then, detectives found his weakness. His son. The kid was a straight-A student and a high school football star. Flores had raised him completely clean, away from the gang life. When police set up a sting, Flores was so strung out on heroin that he couldn't stand up off the toilet. They arrested him, and in doing so, probably saved his life. He served 5 years on drug charges. When he got out in 1991, he celebrated by drinking a full bottle of tequila. He died that night from alcohol poisoning. The man who wrote the rules for 50,000 gang members went out not from a bullet, not from a rival, but from his own celebration drink. Number 2. Adolph Reynoso, Champ. November 21, 2018. Pueblo, Colorado. A 75-year-old man died in a hospital bed near a maximum security federal prison. His name was Adolph Reynoso, but everyone called him Champ. At the time of his death, the FBI considered him the highest-ranking active member of the Mexican Mafia. He never held a press conference. He never gave an interview. He spent his final years locked inside ADX Florence, a place where inmates live in a 7 by 12-foot concrete cell for 23 hours a day. And he still ran the organization from in there. Champ grew up in East Los Angeles, in a neighborhood called Ramona Gardens. He joined Big Hazard, a street gang out of East LA, when he was young. That part of his story is not unusual. A lot of kids in that area did the same thing. What came next is where it gets different. He went to prison, and inside prison, he was brought into the Mexican Mafia. That was not a club you applied to join. You were chosen. The Mexican Mafia is not a Mexican cartel. It started inside California state prisons in the late 1950s, run mostly by Mexican-American men who barely spoke Spanish. They called themselves the Eme, and they controlled the prison yards. Champ became one of the men who kept that system going for decades. His most documented crime happened at a federal prison in Lompoc, California. A man named Thomas Trejo was stabbed 45 times. Champ and 2 others were convicted and sentenced to life plus 99 years. He never came home after that. But here's the thing. Being locked in the most secure prison in the United States did not stop him from making decisions. According to court testimony, Champ and another Eme member at ADX were still being consulted on who lived and who died inside the organization. The walls did not make him irrelevant. They just made communication harder. By the time he died, most of the men who built the Mexican Mafia alongside him were already gone. Some died in prison. Some flipped and went into witness protection. Champ did neither. He stayed loyal to the organization until his last day, which happened to come during surgery to remove 3 tumors from his back. He was 75. He had spent most of his adult life in federal custody. People from Ramona Gardens still called him one of the good ones. Number 1. Joe Morgan Pegleg. On April 10, 1929, a Croatian immigrant's kid was born in San Pedro, California. His parents were so worried about being deported that his father changed the family name from Medjugorje to Morgan the moment he got his citizenship papers. The kid grew up in a Mexican neighborhood in Boyle Heights, learned Spanish in the street, joined a Chicano gang as a teenager, and eventually became the godfather of the most feared Mexican prison gang in American history. He was not Mexican, not even close. By the time Joe Morgan was 17, he had already killed a man. His girlfriend, a 32-year-old woman, talked him into beating her husband to death with a tire iron. Morgan buried the body in the Malibu hills. While waiting for trial in county jail, he stole another inmate's transfer papers and walked out. He got caught, went to San Quentin, did 9 years. He got out in 1955. 1 year later, he robbed a bank in West Covina with a machine gun and took $17,000. He got shot in the leg during the getaway, lost the leg entirely. Prison officials started calling him Pegleg. Nobody called him that to his face. In 1961, Morgan led 11 prisoners out of Los Angeles County Jail through a pipe shaft. The hacksaw blades they used to cut through the locks? He had been hiding them inside his prosthetic leg the whole time. The escape made the front page of the Los Angeles Times. Inside San Quentin, Morgan befriended the Mexican Mafia's early leadership and became one of the key people who shaped the organization into what it is today. He spoke Spanish and Nahuatl. He read books on military strategy and Mexican history. He built alliances with the Aryan Brotherhood, the Italian Mafia in Los Angeles, and drug suppliers in Mexico. He was running an organized crime network from a prison cell, and he was better at it than most people who were doing it from a penthouse. His rule on the streets was simple: buy your drugs from us, pay us a cut of everything else, or face consequences when you eventually end up in prison. And in Los Angeles in the 1970s, most people eventually ended up in prison. Morgan died on November 9, 1993, from liver cancer, serving a life sentence. When the prison called a priest to give him last rites, Morgan turned him away. He had spent 47 years being exactly who he chose to be. He was not about to change that in the last 5 minutes.